Live.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Small Business Updates. This is a partnership with NCTV 18, the Nantucket Island Chamber of Commerce, and the Keep the Rock Solid campaign. I'm Kristie Ferrantella, the President and CEO of the Nantucket Chamber, and here today I have Karen Macumber, our business consultant at the Nantucket Chamber, and Will Hannum from Schwartz and Hannum. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Good afternoon.
So, Will, do you want to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and Schwartz Hannum and what's going on with you guys?
Sure. So, I'm a Nantucket native. So I've been on the island and working out here in different capacities for a long time. Our firm has been kind of active out here for about 20 years. This year, the firm's celebrating its 25th anniversary. What we do as a law firm is practice labor and employment and education law. We handle labor union issues, we handle employment law issues, and we do a lot of work with schools, particularly private schools, independent schools, and also colleges and universities. And starting in about mid-March, the 14 lawyers or so and all of our staff started working from home, probably like all of you. And we've been sort of inundated with questions ever since the new laws started getting passed in March or so, the Leave Act for Coronavirus Leave Act, and then the CARES Act and the PPP loan. And so I think, like the Chamber, we're getting a lot of the similar questions from employers about layoffs and furloughs and unemployment and reopening and everything in between. And we're trying to keep up with all of the new laws and the new guidance out of the CDC or the governor's office in particular. Both are sources of new guidance potentially on a daily basis, it seems like sometimes. So we're keeping busy.
That's great to hear. So anybody watching online, if you'd like to submit a question, just refresh your screen and you can submit that in the chat box. So Karen, do you want to start us off on some questions for Will?
Certainly. So Will, perhaps you can share a little bit about PPP and just the latest and greatest that you've heard. We know that the guidelines and applications were released last week so that folks could start working on their forgiveness application.
Right.
There's a lot of information there. It's a little bit confusing.
Yep.
So perhaps you can kind of give everybody a little bit of guidance in
Sure.
terms of what to look for there.
Great. Okay. Yeah. And so as I was mentioning sort of before we got started, one of my partners, Matt Battistini, is sort of our resident expert on the PPP loan. And he spent the weekend sort of combing through that new guidance. And there's sort of two parts. I'll break my answer down into two main parts. One is that ideally, before you even get to the subject of the forgiveness process, you want some documentation about why you got the loan in the first place, some internal documentation that's ideally really focused and geared on the concept of, what you're doing with that loan money, particularly, using that money towards employee payroll during the applicable forgiveness period. So that's sort of the first bucket that you want to just sort of, it's not a form to fill out. It's a document that you create typically with counsel involved to make sure you've kind of got the I's dotted and the T's crossed, because that's something you want in place before an audit might potentially happen or before you begin to dig into the loan forgiveness process. Now, back to your question, Karen, and the loan forgiveness process, the guidelines that came out are quite dizzying or mind-numbing. And one of the things that seems most helpful at the moment to digesting that is some guidance out of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So that may be a helpful resource to sort of try to boil something down into something more like plain English. There are a number of different ways to be calculating the maximum amount that can be forgiven. There's a lot of math involved. It's payroll up to a certain cap. It's certain employment benefits, but not others. And there's certain expenses outside of payroll that can be included, which expand actually, according to the new guidance, the rent, the mortgage, the utilities that can be included as part of the forgiveness application. Those have potentially been expanded to include things that will be paid in the normal course shortly after the forgiveness period. So there's a lot of detail that I'm really skimming over, and frankly, without a PowerPoint slide and some handouts, it would be really hard to expect, I think, an audience to digest that, and it might consume our entire 20 minutes here. So that's sort of the quick answer, but there's a lot to digest, and hopefully that gives people a place to start.
Right. And Will, I know a lot of business owners are struggling right now, and this is kind of related to PPP and unemployment, where the PPP period has started. Maybe they're not open yet, they're preparing, but won't be. And their employees are on unemployment and, quite frankly, might be making more staying on unemployment in some cases than taking a job that an employer might offer them at possibly lower pay scale.
Right.
Do you have any advice on that, or have you seen any examples of folks handling that well?
Well, I certainly gotten a lot of questions of people struggling with that. How do you bring someone back to work when they're happy staying at home and getting paid more in some cases? I think the biggest challenge in how do you bring someone back to work if they don't want to come back is the fear of that some people have of coming back to work and potentially getting sick. And, as an employer, are you going to, sort of force that issue, force someone to come back when they're not comfortable by threatening to terminate their employment, which legally you've got the right to do, assuming, there's certain factors not coming into play. I mean, the question can get complicated in terms of whether somebody's entitled to some protection for a leave of absence under, the ADA or under, the FFCRA, this alphabet soup of federal laws that gives people the right to some time off in connection with the coronavirus crisis. There's still a question to be resolved about whether or not employees are entitled to collect unemployment when they've got a job to go back to. There's no clear guidance on that I've found, and that needs some clarification. So I think this raises some tough questions, and frankly, most of our clients are trying to err on the side of being considerate and compassionate and understanding of their employees. This is sort of a tough time. When it comes to cost cutting, employers seem to be more inclined to, do pay cuts kind of tiered towards the pay level of the employees involved as opposed to layoffs per se. And so there's no neat kind of answer to the question of what do you do when somebody's on unemployment, collecting more than their paycheck, and you're trying to bring them back. I think maybe the most successful practical solution has been to pay these people more so that they're encouraged to come back. Gotcha. And I've seen news reports of clients who are, or not clients, I've seen news reports of employers who are paying people under the table as a way of getting them to come back while they're still collecting unemployment. I would not recommend that. You got PPP loan fraud and DUA fraud and tax. You don't want all those government agencies coming after you, but yeah.
An alphabet soup of legality there. Yes, exactly.
So you touched on it a little bit about, employees being hesitant to come back maybe because they're nervous or scared of the virus. There's also a lot of hesitation around businesses opening and kind of what the liability is around if a customer got sick or if you have a lodging association and somebody staying there got sick. And what are some of the recommendations that your firm has been giving?
So it's a great question. And I mean, to me, the place to start is by looking at the government guidance that's out there. And at the federal level, primarily that would be the CDC guidance, which has changed several times in the last 3 weeks. We went from 67-page guidance from the CDC to a bunch of PowerPoint slides to now we've got PowerPoint slides and a 60-page guidance last I checked. But I think the CDC guidance gives a lot of important practical advice about how to keep the workplace safe. And some of it is tied or focused on certain industries. And we're still waiting for that sort of guidance from the governor and his task force on reopening, particularly for the phase 2 and businesses, the restaurants and the hotels and such. But I think having the right hygiene measures, the right social distancing measures in place, having the right signs up, the right markings on the floor, having the right cleaning processes in place for that environment, training employees so that you're all strictly following those processes and understand them and have a system in place for educating your customers. I think that is the starting place. And it's not a neat, easy, we're getting questions about waiver forms. Should we have customers, or should we have club members, or should we have parents and students signing these forms saying, gee, I might get sick if I come to school, or if I come to work, or if I go to camp or whatnot. I mean, it's tempting to see that as a quick, easy solution. And yet I think there's two things I want to say about a waiver form. One is that it's not bulletproof at its best. There's questions about whether a court would enforce that kind of waiver form, particularly if I'll call it the business isn't following the kind of basic safety procedures that the government agencies are recommending. So that's why I say start with the recommendations. What does the CDC say? What does the governor say? Focus on those first. I would also, unfortunately, have to add some more alphabet soup to that government agency guidance list. The EEOC has some guidance on whether you can ask employees questions about, how they're feeling and take their temperature. And you can ask those questions and you can take their temperature, but that needs to be looked at. And then there's also OSHA guidance, Occupational Safety Health Agency guidance on how to keep, the workplace safe during a pandemic. So CDC, EEOC, OSHA, the governor, look at all of that. And then you also want to add local guidance. What, if anything, is the town saying about, how to keep the workplace safe? And depending on your constituency, you may also be wanting to be, in contact with the hospital. I think, for example, if you're the hotel or the summer rental property owner or agent, and you've got a customer who's got coronavirus, I think before you start shipping them off island or out of your property, you should be, on the same page with the local public health officials. How do they want that handled? You don't want to sort of exacerbate a health situation and create a local public health crisis by kind of looking at this just from your own narrow perspective. But, before we have this person walk through our halls again and out the building, what does the hospital, what does a local public health official want done in this situation? And so, unfortunately, there's no clear, simple, one-size-fits-all guidance on any of these things. It's going to vary by industry and locale.
And will, specific to the example you just talked about, there's been a lot of discussion about contact tracing. It's not an easy one to say.
Yeah.
And that the responsibility of the provider to get certain information and possibly even log people's comings and goings on an hourly basis. Can you talk at all to kind of what's realistic on that front and what most folks should be thinking about?
Well, so in the first instance, I would be focused on, I'm waiting for some guidance on that for, these businesses, because I think the idea of trying to implement a comprehensive system of collecting personal information from everybody who comes by to pick up a cup of coffee or who, happens to be in your store looking at items but not buying something or whatever the case may be. I think that sounds like a tall ask without clear guidance and support from the governor's office about how to do that and whether it's necessary. And I think it raises some privacy concerns potentially if you're doing that without the support of government guidance behind you. So I think we're going to see guidance on that at some point. And I think there's a good chance that we're going to, that employers are going to play a role in that, but it's not clear to me what that role is going to be. And so at the moment, I kind of put that on the back burner of things to think about and worry about until we get clear guidance. I mean, if you look at the CDC guidance about what it takes to reopen, and you're one of those phase 2 businesses that's hoping to reopen on June 8th or whatever it is, there's plenty in there to tackle about, how to keep employees safe, how to keep customers safe, how to make sure the workplace is clean and all that. There's a lot to do if you haven't been working on it already. And unfortunately, we just don't have better answers yet on contact tracing and testing as well.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't have a better answer for that.
I know, come on. I'm one of those people that has to open up on June 8th. So looking for the tips and tricks, especially related to short-term rentals.
Yeah. Well, and I want to say about June 8th, I hope that date holds. But I think we all have to keep open mind about the possibility that it's going to change again. Everything else seems to change on a daily basis, right? So fingers crossed.
True. So is there something that you would recommend though for folks, again, maybe restaurants or hotels, a lot of people are in hospitality here, obviously.
Yeah, right.
Should they be changing anything on the policies that are on their websites? That's, things that someone has to agree to before they make a reservation, or just some simple language that can be added. Anything that would make sense for folks to add right now?
I mean, I don't have an answer to that question. So it's a fair question. They don't have an answer for something like that. I thought you were going to go in a different direction with the question, which was, I think to the extent that the businesses have migrated to electronic payment, touchless electronic payment, I think that might serve two purposes. And I know a lot of businesses out here, have been cash only, at least for the last 50 years or so. But I think the electronic piece sort of cuts down the risk of virus being spread on currency, but it also may come in very handy for contact tracing purposes later on. In terms of, language for a policy or a website or communication with customers, I think the practical tip I would give would be to sort of go through a mock exercise of, what it's like to be open in whatever the rules are that you expect to be in place, curbside pickup or whatever it is. Do you have do you have I mean, I saw a business open up at the beginning of the weekend, and I understand they're going to be closed for a few days as they fine tune things, but they were clearly struggling with social distancing on day one. The line that I saw outside was, not what they would want it to be. And they've fixed that, I think, over the last couple of days, and they're going to, fine tune it further. But I think to the point about this not being a one size fits all problem for businesses to solve, doing a little, sort of tabletop exercise or fire drill or whatever you want to call it to see whether you've got a system that makes sense. I think there's a little bit of a learning process there for each business, each office, each retail shop, each restaurant. So that might be a practical tip of, kind of what to do to help get ready for June 8th. And that'll include putting up some signs about, social distancing and wearing a mask and thinking through what are you going to do if somebody comes into the store or the restaurant and isn't wearing a mask, that sort of thing.
I know that myself, as well as some of the other folks that own businesses, have been doing is kind of literally a walkthrough of our own spaces as if we were a customer, and sitting there and thinking about everything that someone might touch and how they interact with things and where we would need cleaning stations and that kind of thing. And I think just kind of going through that kind of inventory seems to be helpful.
Yeah, I was going to say, what you may have learned some interesting things through that exercise yourself, just about how I can imagine the third or fourth time through, you might be learning something new that you hadn't noticed the first and second time through.
You realize how many different things people touch.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've had the same problem in our office, and our office has been closed except for, one or two people opening, the mail and, making sure legal notices get scanned and sent to the right person. But, it seems simple, but it's not. So
you touched on a little bit of going to electronic payments as a good kind of business move. Are there any other suggestions you have for businesses that could kind of adapt to this new COVID life?
I mean, another bit of, I think, some practical advice that has worked for us and that I've seen, talked about is just finding creative ways to change your business model and your business strategy. I think, from a customer perspective, we're doing webinars now like we've never done before, daily basis. You're just trying to adapt. And I think, from a customer perspective, that, some of the island businesses that are doing curbside pickup, I mean, at some level, I think it's easier and better than, shopping at those places or going out to eat at those places last summer. So I think if you're thoughtful and creative about how you go about trying to find a way to survive, that's a great use of energy in this environment. It's not legal. So I feel a little guilty giving you a practical answer instead of a legal answer, but there's no simple, good answers to the legal questions. It's usually, I don't know yet, because the guidance either hasn't come out or it's about to come out and change.
Yes, that's definitely been one of the biggest challenges for our members is you finally get guidance and then it changes. And then even with the reopening, we've had, information today that's coming out for curbside retail that wasn't out yesterday, even though it was starting yesterday. So businesses are trying to catch up and adapt, and it's been challenging.
Well, and one of the things we're doing to catch up and adapt is somebody in our office is digging into everything new that comes out. Like I was saying, Matt did over the weekend with the loan forgiveness guidance. So for folks who aren't getting our emails or, about our webinars or whatnot, there may be, if you want more than 20 minutes of this in one sitting, you can get 60 or 90 minutes once a week, at least, usually through the firm webinars. And I'm sure other law firms are doing the same thing, but that may be a less painful way of keeping up than actually reading some of those things yourself.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what webinars and seminars you're hosting right now?
So, sure. I mean, Matt and Kirsten do a weekly webinar for employers. It's just what's new for employers in the COVID, pandemic universe. So new guidance or what questions are coming up. It's sort of a longer version of the conversation we're having today. And that's typically been on a Thursday or Friday, the last several weeks at least. And sometimes they're doing that sponsored through another organization, and sometimes they're just doing it through the firm. We're doing a lot of programming for independent schools as well, trying to figure out are they going to reopen or they've all got questions about these loans, those kinds of issues. At some level, it's what we've been talking about. The spectrum of things we've been talking about, although that's changed over time. The focus and the subject matter. There seems to be a couple of important new things every week.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Karen, do you have any additional questions?
No, I mean, I think we were, again, just digging for any kind of top tips that folks should keep in mind right now. But I think as you mentioned, because things are changing so frequently and because each industry is so different and we're waiting to hear so much more, it's kind of difficult to make generalizations.
Yeah. There's one last thought that I neglected to share earlier. Some industries, I suspect most, but I'm not aware, I haven't done a survey, but a lot of industry groups, sort of leadership groups within industries are coming out with guidance. There may be multiple forms of guidance across, each industry. But I think if you can find, guidance like that that's specific to, hotel and restaurant, like I don't know if the Mass, Restaurant Association is doing something, but it wouldn't shock me if they were. And some of that industry guidance can be very helpful, particularly as a starting place while we're waiting for the governor's guidance to come out. So that might be a place to look for, a starting point while we're waiting for clarity from the governor.
I think that's a very good point. I know some of the larger trade groups out of DC have been doing quite a bit of work on this to set some standards and also just to follow the legislation, because there is so much out there. Hopefully some of that will get passed so that the PPP can make more sense for more folks.
Exactly. Yep. Good point. Yeah, it was as I was talking to Matt, my partner earlier, he was saying there's still PPP loan money available, apparently. So
I know, which is amazing because they were talking a week or two ago about it running out. So
right. Yeah. So well, other thoughts. I don't want to bore your audience with.
So if anybody wants to find out about your webinars, where should they go?
Our website is www.shpclaw.com. That's like ship claw without the I.
Perfect.
And should be either there on the homepage or on the resource page. And be thrilled to have more people sign up if that's helpful for them. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're busy helping all of your clients, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
Yes, thanks for including us. Appreciate it. Thank you both.
Bye.
All right.